Welkom terug by Insig. Ons sit nou die debat tussen die DA-leierskandidate Dr. Wilmot James en Mmusi Maimane voort. Dr. James, I'm resuming with you. You mentioned growth prospects of the party just before we broke. Is the DA at risk of growing too fast?
There's always that risk, so you have to manage it. I think that what our struggle has been is to break into the black community in a significant way. And in the last election, we started making some headway, and the potential there is large. So the risk with any organization growing quickly is that you can lose coherence. You need more staff, more people, and so on and so forth in terms of the professional organization of the party. So that has to be very carefully managed so that we keep coherence, we keep discipline, and we keep the basic values of the DA, which are derived from the Constitution, intact. So
this trajectory, Mr. Maimane, just before we go to you, has been quite steeply upwards, 12.5% in 2004 to 22%, but that represented a shift to 4 million voters, up from 2 million in 2009. Is there such a thing as growing too fast if you are the opposition?
Look, I think one of the best things that we've done is built a very strong infrastructure. I think our party is very well managed, very well organized. And it's important. We've learned some key lessons, how we select candidates, how we grow in key strategic areas. And so now the job is really to focus on how we grow. It's going to be important for us as South Africans that next year we govern in Nelson Mandela Bay. It's going to be important for us to govern in Tshwane. It's going to be important to us to govern in strategic municipalities. Quite frankly, as I sit here today, I think it's important for all of us as South Africans to recognize the fact that democracy can only succeed when power moves from one party to the next. If we fail to do that, I think there are many challenges that South Africans are facing. We cannot afford to keep an ANC government who's allowing unemployment to go so high, who's allowing our public sector debt to go so high. This is a function of us being able to go. It's going to be critical for us to see a change in government sooner, because that's the best form of accountability. And so I believe as an opposition party, I welcome the growth and want to prepare for more.
In Tshwane, Dr. James, to pick up there, in Tshwane you'll speak to a very disparate group of people in order to win the city in next year's local government elections. In the middle of town there stands a big statue of Paul Kruger on Church Square. Do you think this statue should stay?
The answer is yes. I think statues should stay because they remind us of our history, whatever that history may be. What has to happen is that statues have to be repurposed to serve a grander non-racial vision for the future. It might require building new statues. It may require moving statues into different places. But the statues, in my view, ought to stay as long as they are repurposed to serve a grander, more noble vision.
Mr. Maimane, is this the kind of message that you can take to Tshwane and win the city?
Without fail, I think we want to speak to South Africans who believe still in the principles of reconciliation. We also want to speak to South Africans who also understand, across the racial line, that in fact some statues actually represent to people of this country a messaging that is hard. And we must be able to empathize with us, we must be able to understand that. And I think what we must do is follow in some ways what Parliament's example has been, is that right in front there's a statue, there's another one of President Mandela, there's another one of Walter Sisulu, and we build a narrative in South Africa that says, we are an inclusive society, we are a reconciled society, and we can take South Africa forward. But our failure has been that we haven't been able to include a new history. But more than that, we failed to deal with transformation in South Africa.
After the success, though, of the, if you can call it that, of the Rhodes Must Fall movement in Cape Town, how do you defend retaining Paul Kruger's statue if indeed a majority of residents of Tshwane or Pretoria say that they want it to stay or move?
Well, I think the rights of South Africans must always be upheld here. Let's decide what is the success of that. The success of it taught a movement to say, if you disagree with something, you can deface it, take it down. That's not the transformation that we saw in South Africa. You know, in 1994, these statues existed. But how do we deal with it? We went to CODESA, we negotiated, we came out and we said, this is the model that we want to take going forward. We cannot in this country arrive at a point where we say the best way for us to change is to apply tactics that of anarchy and be able to say what we don't like, we must deface. I don't think that's the narrative we want. What we desperately must need and build in South Africa is a process of conversation. What I would have rather seen is for Parliament to debate the issue, and if we agree on a point that says Paul Kruger must go, then we must all agree after a process of negotiation and discussion.
Dr. James, the conversation sounded more like shouting for the last few weeks.
You know, it's this national government's policy when it comes to statues and heritage to in fact keep the statue standing. That is the national policy, and to repurpose statues. What we've seen is with the EFF and with other more populist movements, with a very short-sighted view of history and what you do with the assets of history, begin a process of breaking down. And they're very good at breaking down, they're not good at building. So that is what we have to contend with. I mean, the policies are there. I
want to put to you a position that you took in the Sunday Times yesterday in a Q&A about the rights of rape accused, where you speak about what members of the public may or may not want in Tshwane or otherwise. But in the Q&A, you said that rape accused should not be granted bail summarily. How can you defend that from a liberal perspective?
Well, in fact, what I would do is restate that. The thing about bail is that it's not punitive. So bail is set in order to make sure that somebody can stand trial. And so what I would recommend in terms of what happens in other countries is to make the default position that when it comes to violent crimes, that bail is not provided unless the accused and the defense can make a case for bail to be granted, and of course the judge makes the final decision.
But surely this is a basic right in terms of the Bill of Rights.
The granting of bail, yes it is.
Mr. Maimane, your view on this?
I stood up, I said, look, South Africans get accused for too many things. And make no mistake that there have been many people who have had allegations put against them. It is our constitutional right that says once the allegation is in place, you are innocent until proven guilty. And I believe in a legal argument, South Africans must be able to put the case forward and be granted bail. I think that we must always remind ourselves that we come from a history of abuse of law. We must come to a place where our constitution guarantees rights, and the rights of even people who have been accused of rape are still maintained.
Let's talk about some of these rights just a moment, Dr. James, that the Constitution enshrines. Would you support a referendum on gay marriage in South Africa?
I don't think the issue here is about a debate. The law in this country gives rights.
Would you support a referendum on it, though?
Well, if South Africans felt that they needed to vote on the issue, they should. I still stand on the view that gay rights must be protected. South Africans who are gay, who want to marry each other, are entitled to do so. The law gives that right. So I don't know what the referendum would be about. In fact, I still maintain that those rights are in the Constitution and must be protected.
Why did you tell the Sunday Times yesterday, though, that you would support a referendum on another very contentious issue that South Africans talk about very often, and that is the death penalty?
Because without fail, I'm a Democrat. I would not support that view. I would not support the death penalty as an example. I still sit here today and understand that our judicial system still has flaws. I don't think the death penalty is a deterrent to crime. But ultimately, as a Democrat, I still uphold that the rights democracy upholds. It's not the best system, but it is the system that we have. It upholds the fact that it's by the people, for the people. And if the people want to vote on it, the people must vote on it.
Dr. James, can you respond?
Well, I think Mr. Maimane doesn't understand our Constitution at all. The Bill of Rights, this is the right to life, is a fundamental right, and it cannot be derogated, and it cannot be made conditional. So it can only be made conditional on very specific, clear grounds. It cannot be changed through a vote in Parliament. It cannot be subject to a referendum. Imagine putting the death penalty to a referendum. Imagine putting abortion to the referendum. The fundamental rights in the Constitution, in the Bill of Rights, including freedom of association, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, the right to life, cannot be qualified. And therefore, it cannot be changed, and it can never be subject to a referendum. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of the Constitution.
Mr. Maimane.
I disagree with Dr. James. I think ultimately we came to a constitutional agreement. We negotiated, we fought as South Africans, and we agreed. There are many mechanisms that we must be able to talk about. There are other practices that I may not be able to uphold. But the ultimate right that at least is given to the people of this country is that it must always be their voice that must be given expression. It's their views of the people. We have referendums on many different things. We've proposed a referendum on tolling. We've proposed a referendum on other things. It's the rights of South Africans to be able to express
What happens when the views of the people clash with that which is enshrined in the Constitution?
No, I think in this instance it's quite clear. I think we can accept the fact that many South Africans who believe in the protection of the Constitution, for example, even on the expropriation bill, so long as we uphold the constitutional principle and the right to life, I think South Africans can stand up and vote in against the death penalty, and I still uphold that view. I think that's why I started this preamble by saying, as a person, I would not uphold that right because I support the Constitution on this issue.
No, the bill. I mean, there are general laws of application. We're talking about the Bill of Rights here. We're talking about the Bill of Rights here, and the Bill of Rights cannot be made conditional. And it's not subject to a referendum or to a vote. It is protected through constitutional means. It's a fundamental basis of a liberal democratic society. And now I can just refer Mr. Maimane to go and read the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, when it says what the conditions are for limiting those rights. To just give you one example, you can limit the right to free speech when it comes to hate speech. So you have a series of basic rights. Everybody has the same series of basic rights, except those rights that infringe on the rights of others, such as hate speech does, for example. So what we have is in the Bill of Rights, which is different to the general laws of the country, and those laws cannot be subject to a referendum. That would be utterly unconstitutional.
One of the rights that are enshrined, Mr. Maimane, I'm coming to you, in the Constitution is freedom to practice the religion one wants, also freedom not to practice religion. Do you think that schools should be secular?
I think schools' governing bodies are given the choice. They must be entitled to make that decision. And I think it's not up to me to be prescriptive to what schools must do. I, for example, went to a Catholic school, which is a religious school, but that right is protected. It's entitled for a school to be able to do so. And the governing bodies must be able to agree on that issue. But I think ultimately, so long as the rule upholds the rule of law, it upholds constitutional order, the governing body gets together and be able to make a decision, they can be able to do so. There are very good Muslim schools. There are very good schools that don't even practice any religion. But it's their right to be able to exist. And so long as the school governing body is able to agree on it, they can take the issue forward.
On religion, I want to ask you, does God speak to you about the way you lead the DA in Parliament?
It's important. It's my own personal choice. It's an issue that I hold a personal faith. And it's important. I still maintain my faith. And it's something that I must practice. I'm entitled to do so. I think there's a generalized view that says that if you have a religion, then you cannot be liberal, which I think is dangerous. I think the issue here is that I have a personal conviction, I have a faith that I uphold, but I also understand that my faith is subject to the laws of this country.
How do you reconcile what is taught at Liberty Church, your church, about gay rights, for example, and gay marriage being said not to exist, with the rights enshrined in the Constitution?
I have no challenge with that. I think our church has a view that it holds, but I think ultimately our church does not prescribe the laws to this country. It's not the government. The law of this country, the Constitution, gives rights to gay people. I think sometimes we can be narrow and say, well, we take this one particular teaching and ignore the rest. There are many other issues that our church advocates for. The church that I go to, they advocate for the rights of poor people. They advocate for an advancement of other issues. So I don't think, but fortunately they are not the government. They are a personal faith body, which are entitled to hold a particular view. I don't agree with everything that is said even in our church, but the fact of the matter is that the right exists for them to be able to say that. The Constitution provides rights for gay people.
Dr. James?
There's a strict separation between party and state. There's also a very strict separation between church and state. And we have to uphold that. There's no contradiction between being religious and being a liberal Democrat. The choice is the individual's choice. So you can certainly have a Christian as a liberal Democrat. But what is very, very, very important is that the boundary between church and state should be observed. And that's the danger we would face if we start seeing certain kinds of denominational practices, prayers being given in the opening of meetings, and so on and so on and so forth. So I believe that the question of the church and the religion should be kept out of politics, but we must be tolerant of people's religious diversity in a liberal arrangement, and there must be a strict separation between the affairs of church and the affairs of state and the parties associated with it.
Dr. James, Mmusi Maimane, thank you. We now come to questions sent to us by viewers. On Twitter just a few minutes ago, Vian Boetus asks, I would like to know how they are going to win over poor black South African voters. Mr. Maimane.
I come from a poor background. My parents were poor. We understand one key principle is that there are issues about economic development. We must care about issues that black South Africans are challenged with. We must face issues of inequality, issues of land ownership. I think we must be at the forefront of that. But equally so, we must build an activist culture that allows us to live in communities. We can't be going into communities just to visit. We must be able to live there and feel the pain of South Africans. So when we represent South Africans in Parliament, we represent them and their issues. But equally so, we must build a values-based centre. We can't simply say in the interest of just attracting black votes, we must allow any South African who simply may hold views that are xenophobic. They may hold hold views that are homophobic. But I don't want those people in the DA, because we must build a party that agrees on reconciliation, on racism, and be able to presence ourselves in our communities and ultimately be able to care enough about issues that challenge South Africans.
Dr. James.
The most important thing we can do is generate jobs for South Africans. Poverty can be eliminated and poverty can be reduced if we have an economy that is capable of generating jobs. I believe that the DA's plan for growth and jobs can do that. One of the things that is a lasting asset for any citizen and any child is a good quality education. It's an asset that allows you to get a job, become competitive in the modern world. So we must pay unremitting attention to quality educational provision to everybody and get into a situation where we generate jobs.
The next question speaks to party unity after a debate in a period which can be quite divisive. Marinet Jordan, wonder if public disagreements between two DA leaders will confuse voters about the party's general stance going forward. Very, very briefly, Mr. Maimane and then Dr. James.
The best thing about the DA is that the fact that we're able to disagree, we're able to argue through points, and ultimately what happens after this conversation is that ultimately as a party we can communicate. I think it's important as a demonstration of democracy. It's important about the ideas of where this party is going. And I think as I sit here today, we've sometimes had disagreements in the party, but we come out of it unanimous, as we will on the 10th of May, regardless of who the leader is. And I believe I can take this party forward, regardless of the divisions that people seem to suggest that are there. I believe that this party will unite behind the new leader and take the issue forward, and will communicate on our policies as we stand.
Dr. James.
Let me say that when I win on Sunday, I would expect Mr. Maimane to unite behind me, and if he wins, I will unite behind him.
Dr. James, Mr. Maimane, thank you very much.
I'll see you on Sunday.
Dit dan die einde van vanaand se eerste DA-debat op Insig. Op 10 Mei sal ons weet wie neem die leiersels by Helen Zille oor. Mag die beste man wen. Bly ingeskakel, Insig gaan net hierna voort.